Emily's hand froze midair, the coffee pot trembling above the cup. A 300-pound stranger in a leather vest had just gripped her wrist, not to hurt her, but to stop her from walking toward the two men watching her from the door. His voice was low, urgent, final. "Stay close. From this moment on, I'm your father now." She yanked her arm back. "I don't even know you." "You will," he said. "But right now, if you walk away from me, you won't live long enough to ask why." Before we continue, if stories like this keep you up at night, wondering what you'd do in her place, hit subscribe and stay with me until the very end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to know exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning. Emily Carter had worked the night shift at Miller's Diner for almost 2 years. And in all that time, nothing had ever really scared her. Drunks, yes. Rude truckers, sure. But nothing that made the hair on her arms stand up the way it did the moment those two men walked through the door. It was a Tuesday, slow quiet, the kind of night where the jukebox played the same 6 songs on a loop, and the only sound besides that was the hum of the fryer. Emily was refilling ketchup bottles behind the counter when the bell above the door rang. She looked up out of habit. That was her mistake. 2 men, both in dark coats despite the mild evening. Both scanning the room the way a person scans a room when they're not looking for a table, they're looking for a person. And their eyes landed on her and stayed there. Emily's stomach tightened. She told herself she was being paranoid. Small-town waitress, overactive imagination, too many true crime podcasts on her drive home. She grabbed 2 menus and forced a smile. "Evening, sit anywhere you—" "We're fine standing," the taller one said. His eyes never left her face. Emily's smile faltered. Behind her, the cook Pete was in the back, oblivious, humming along to the radio. There was no one else in the diner, no other customers, just her, and 2 men who weren't ordering food, weren't taking a booth, weren't doing anything except staring. Her hand found the edge of the counter and gripped it. "Can I help you with something?" Neither man answered. And that's when the door opened again, and everything changed. He was enormous. 6 foot something, built like he'd spent a lifetime lifting things other men couldn't. Graybeard, weathered face, a black leather vest with patches sewn across it, and right in the center, unmistakable, the words, "Hell's Angels." Emily had seen bikers pass through town before. They usually kept to themselves, ordered pie, left cash tips, and rode off. But this man didn't sit at a booth. He didn't even look at a menu. He walked straight toward her. The 2 men in dark coats, the ones who had been staring at her like she was prey, went rigid. One of them actually took a step backward. The biker didn't spare them a glance. He pulled out a stool at the counter, sat down across from Emily, and looked at her with an intensity that made her forget for a second to breathe. "Emily," he said, not a question, a fact. "How do you know my—" "Listen to me carefully," he said, cutting her off, his voice dropping so low that only she could hear it. "Those 2 men by the door. Do not look at them again." Emily's pulse spiked. "Who are you?" "My name is Victor. Victor Hayes." He said it like it should mean something. When her face stayed blank, something flickered behind his eyes, surprise, maybe, or sadness. "You really don't know?" "Know what, sir, I think you have me confused with." He reached across the counter, not touching her, just close enough that she froze. "Stay close," he said. "From this moment on, I'm your father now." The words hit her like a slap. "Excuse me." Emily's voice cracked between fear and fury. "I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but I'm calling the police, right?" "Go ahead." Victor didn't move. "Call them, and then explain to me how you're going to survive the 20 minutes it takes them to get here, because those 2 men did not come to this diner for coffee." Emily's eyes darted against every instinct she had back toward the door. The men were still there, still watching, and now one of them was reaching slowly into his coat. Victor was already moving. He rose from the stool in one motion, placing himself between Emily and the 2 men, like a wall of muscle and leather, and his voice, when it came out, wasn't a whisper anymore. "Not tonight," he said. "Not here." The man's hand stopped inside his coat. For 3 long seconds, nobody in that diner breathed. Then, without a word, the 2 men turned and walked out. The bell above the door rang once cheerful and completely wrong for the moment, and then they were gone into the dark. Emily's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the counter to stay upright, her whole body shaking. What just happened?" she whispered. Who are you? Who were they? What is going on? Victor turned back to her, and for the first time his hard expression softened into something that looked almost like grief. Sit down, Emily. I don't want to sit down. I want answers. You'll get them, but not standing there shaking like that. Sit. Something in his voice, not a command, exactly more like the voice of someone who'd said those words to a scared kid 100 times before, made her legs move on their own. She sat. Pete finally emerged from the kitchen, took one look at the giant biker sitting across from his waitress, and hesitated in the doorway. Emily, everything okay out here? Emily opened her mouth, unsure what to even say. Victor answered for her. She's fine. We're old family friends. He didn't look at Pete when he said it. His eyes stayed locked on Emily. Isn't that right? Emily wanted to scream, that it wasn't right that she'd never seen this man in her life, that two strangers had just tried to do God knows what to her in the middle of her shift. But something about the steadiness in Victor's eyes stopped her. He wasn't lying to hurt her. He was lying to protect her. Yeah, she said slowly, her voice shaking. Family friend. Pete shrugged and disappeared back into the kitchen, and the second he did, Emily rounded on Victor. Start talking, right now. Who were those men? How do you know my name, and what did you mean you're my father now? I have a father. Or I had one. He left before I was even born. My mother told me that my whole life. Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. It sounded almost tired, almost broken. Your mother lied to you. The words landed in Emily's chest like a stone dropped into still water. Excuse me? She didn't lie to be cruel, Victor said, quickly, seeing the anger rising in her face. She lied to keep you alive. There's a difference, and someday you'll understand it. But right now, tonight, what matters is that the men who just walked out of here work for the same people who destroyed your father's life 23 years ago. And they just found you. Emily shook her head, refusing to let the words in. This is insane. You're insane. My dad was some deadbeat who ran off farm before I was born. That's it. That's the whole story. Is it? Victor leaned forward. Then why did two men just walk into this diner and stare at you like you were a target? Why did they reach for a weapon the second I stood between you and them? Deadbeats don't leave enemies like that behind, Emily. Heroes do. Heroes! Her voice cracked on the words somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You don't even know me. I've known you your whole life, Victor said quietly. I just never got to say hello. Emily stared at him, searching his weathered face for the light, desperate to find it, because the alternative that everything she'd believed about her own life was built on sand was too much to hold. Prove it, she whispered. Prove any of this. Victor reached into his vest slow enough that she could see every movement and pulled out something small worn at the edges from years of being carried. A photograph. He set it on the counter and slid it toward her. Emily looked down and the breath left her lungs. It was a photo of a much younger Victor standing beside another man, tall, dark-haired, with a smile Emily had seen every single day of her life without knowing it, in the mirror. Her hand trembled as she picked up the photo. That's not possible. I don't look like you have his eyes, Victor said softly. You've had them since the day you were born. I know because I was there. Emily's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of a stranger, refusing to believe a single word of this, and yet her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her mind kept circling back to the same impossible question. If he's my father, she said, barely audible, then where is he? Why hasn't he ever come for me? 23 years and nothing. Not a letter, not a phone call, nothing. Victor's jaw tightened. Emily watched something pass behind his eyes, not hesitation, but pain. Old and heavy, the kind that never really heals, just gets carried. Because he couldn't, Victor said. Emily, your father didn't leave you. Then what happened to him? Victor opened his mouth to answer, and that was the exact moment the diner's window shattered. Emily screamed and dropped to the floor on instinct, glass raining down across the counter where she'd been sitting seconds before. Victor was already moving, already covering her body with his own, already shouting something toward the kitchen. Pete, call 911 now. Outside tires screeched against pavement. An engine roared to life and tore off into the night. For a moment, all Emily could hear was her own heartbeat hammering so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. Glass crunched under Victor's boots as he rose, scanning the parking lot. Through the shattered window, his whole body tensed, like a man ready for war. They're testing us, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Sending a message. Emily, still on the floor, still shaking, looked up at him with tears finally breaking free down her cheeks. A message about what? She demanded. What do they want from me? I'm nobody. I'm a waitress in a diner in the middle of nowhere. I don't know anything. I don't have anything. You have something they need destroyed, Victor said grimly, helping her to her feet with a gentleness that didn't match the size of his hands. You have his blood in your veins. And as long as you're alive, breathing proof that Daniel Carter had a daughter, you're a threat to them. Emily froze. Daniel Carter. Your father's name, Victor said. You didn't even know it, did you? She shook her head slowly and something inside her chest cracked open. 23 years of believing she was the daughter of a man too weak or too selfish to stay, and now in the space of 10 minutes, that entire foundation was crumbling into something unrecognizable. I need to sit down, she whispered. There's no time. Victor's voice was firm, now urgent. They know where you work. That means they'll know where you live within the hour. We need to move, and we need to move now. Move where I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't even... Emily. Victor grabbed her gently by both shoulders, forcing her to look him directly in the eyes. I made a promise to your father 23 years ago. A promise I have kept every single day since, whether you knew it or not. I am not about to break it tonight. Now I need you to trust me, even though every instinct in your body is screaming at you not to. Can you do that? Can you do so? Emily searched his face one more time. The scar above his eyebrow, the exhaustion carved into every line of his skin like a man who'd been standing guard for longer than she'd been alive. The way his hands, big enough to break her in half, were trembling, just slightly, not from fear, she realized, but from the weight of finally, after 23 years, being able to say the truth out loud. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll come with you. Relief broke across Victor's face like a wave. Good girl, he murmured. Your father would be proud of you right now. I hope you know that. They moved fast out the back of the diner past a stunned Pete, who was still on the phone with dispatch, into the cold night air, where a line of motorcycles sat waiting, engines already running 5 more men in matching vests, forming a loose circle around them like they'd been expecting exactly this. Emily's head spun. Who are all these? Family, Victor said, simply handing her a spare helmet. The kind that doesn't leave. As she climbed onto the back of his motorcycle, hands gripping his vest for dear life, Emily caught one last glimpse of the diner behind her. The shattered window, the flashing lights of a police cruiser finally pulling into the lot. The ordinary life she'd lived for 23 years, disappearing behind her in the dark. Victor, she called over the roar of the engines, her voice raw. Tell me the truth. All of it. Who took my father from me? Victor was quiet for a long moment as the bike pulled onto the empty highway, the wind tearing at both their words. The same people, he finally said, who are about to find out that killing him wasn't enough to bury the truth. Emily's whole body went cold. Killing him, she repeated, barely able to force the words out. You said he couldn't come back. I thought maybe he was in prison or hiding. Or Victor didn't answer right away. And in that silence, in the roar of the engine and the dark stretch of highway ahead of them, Emily understood with a certainty that shattered something deep inside her chest exactly what he wasn't saying. Her father was gone. Not absent, not a coward, not a man who chose to walk away from his own daughter. Gone. And somewhere out there in the dark behind them, the people responsible were still hunting, and now they were hunting her too. A pair of headlights surged out of a side road behind them, closing the distance fast. Victor! Emily shouted, twisting to look back. Someone's coming! Victor's head snapped toward his mirror. Whatever he saw made his whole body go rigid. Hold on to me. Do not let go no matter what happens. What's happening, Victor? Talk to me. Same car from the diner parking lot, he shouted back. They're not done tonight. Emily's arms locked around his waist so tight her knuckles went white. Ahead of them, the 5 other riders fanned out into a loose formation, 2 peeling back to flank the pursuing car, the others tightening around Victor and Emily like a moving wall of steel. The car's engine screamed as it tried to force its way through the gap between 2 motorcycles. One of the riders, a heavy-set man Emily would later learn was named Bear, swerved his bike hard to the left, cutting the car off, forcing it to brake or crash into the guardrail. Horns, screeching rubber. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, certain for one terrible second that this was how it would end, 23 years of an ordinary life over in a blur of metal and asphalt, because of a truth she never even knew she was supposed to be protecting. Emily, look at me, eyes open. Stay with me. Victor's voice cut through the panic like a lifeline, and she forced her eyes open, forced herself to breathe. The car fell back. Bear's maneuver had bought them just enough distance, and Victor gunned the throttle, taking a sharp exit off the highway that Emily was certain hadn't been there a second ago. The other bikes scattered in different directions behind them, a decoy, so that whoever was chasing them wouldn't know which trail to follow. Within minutes, the roar of pursuit had faded into nothing but wind and silence. Emily's whole body was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Are they gone? Are we safe? For now, Victor said, and something in the grim set of his jaw told her that for now was the best answer she was going to get tonight. But Emily, I need you to understand something right here, right now, before we go any further. What? Tonight wasn't random. Tonight wasn't bad luck. His voice dropped heavy with a truth he'd clearly been carrying alone for far too long. They've been waiting for you to turn 23, waiting for a reason, and now that reason has arrived, whether either of us wanted it to or not. Emily's stomach dropped. What reason, Victor? What are you not telling me? Victor finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the wind, but every word landing like a hammer against Emily's chest. 23 years ago, your father found something that powerful men wanted buried forever. He chose to protect the truth instead of himself. And tonight, Emily, it's your turn to decide what you're willing to protect. The motorcycles roared into the darkness, carrying a waitress, who an hour ago believed she knew exactly who she was, and a secret that was about to rewrite everything she'd ever been told about her own life. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with embedded tension twists and psychological depth. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with embedded tension twists and psychological depth. The motorcycles didn't slow down for almost 40 minutes. By the time the engines finally cut out, Emily's legs had gone numb from gripping the seat, and her fingers ached from holding onto Victor's vest like it was the only solid thing left in the world. They'd pulled off a dirt road she never would have found on her own, past a rusted gate that Bear opened and locked again behind them, deep into land that seemed to belong to nobody and everybody at once. A long, low building sat at the end of the drive, lights already on inside as if someone had known they were coming before they did. Emily swung off the bike on shaking legs and nearly went down. Victor caught her elbow before she hit the ground. Easy, he said. You're safe. For now. You keep saying that, for now, like it's supposed to make me feel better. It's the only honest thing I've got to offer you tonight. The other riders were already dismounting, pulling off helmets, exchanging low words Emily couldn't hear. A woman came out of the building, maybe 50 silver, streaked through dark hair, a rifle slung casually over one shoulder like it was as ordinary as a dish towel. This her? The woman asked, looking Emily over head to toe. This is her, Victor said. Emily, this is Rosa. She runs this place. You can trust her. I don't even know if I can trust you, Emily said, and her voice cracked on the last word, exhaustion and fear finally catching up to her all at once. Rosa's expression softened just slightly. Smart girl, don't trust anybody tonight. Trust the sunrise. Everything looks different by morning. It's the middle of the night. I have work in 6 hours. I have a life. You had a life, Rosa said not unkindly. Come inside. You're freezing. Emily hadn't even noticed she was shaking until Rosa said it, and the second the word left the woman's mouth, her whole body seemed to remember how cold the night air was, how thin her diner uniform felt against the wind, how far she was from anything that made sense. Inside the building was warmer than she expected. A long room with mismatched couches, a wood stove crackling, in the corner photographs on the walls of men and motorcycles going back decades. Emily sank onto the nearest couch because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore and put her face in her hands. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then from across the room, a younger rider, barely older than Emily, leaned with sharp eyes that hadn't softened once since they arrived, crossed his arms and looked straight at Victor. You brought a civilian here, to Rosa's place, without a vote. Marcus, Victor started. No, I want to hear the answer. Marcus's voice had an edge to it that made Emily's stomach clench all over again. Daniel's been gone 23 years. You want to reopen all of that tonight with people already shooting at diners? You could have gotten her killed just walking in there. I could have gotten her killed by not walking in there. Victor snapped back, and for the first time Emily saw real anger flash across his face, not at her, but at the situation itself at 23 years of a promise finally colliding with reality. You weren't there, Marcus. You don't get a vote on this one. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence usually did. Emily looked between them and something in her chest, some instinct she didn't know she still had, made her stand up. Stop, she said, and her voice, though shaking, carried. Both of you, everyone keeps talking around me like I'm not sitting right here. I want to know everything. Right now, no more half sentences, no more you'll understand someday. Everything. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and gestured toward a smaller room off to the side. Come with me. The room was small, mostly bare, except for a desk, a couple of chairs, and a metal filing cabinet that looked older than Emily herself. Victor closed the door behind them, and for a second he just stood there, both hands braced on the desk, head down, like a man gathering the strength to finally set down something he'd carried for a very long time. Your father, he began, wasn't just a member of this club. He was my best friend, closer than a brother. We patched in the same year, rode together for almost a decade before you were even born. Okay, Emily said, arms crossed, bracing herself. Keep going. Daniel had a gift most people in this life don't have. He noticed things, patterns, money moving in ways it shouldn't. Around the time your mother got pregnant with you, he started doing side work for a trucking company out of Billings, legitimate on paper. But the numbers didn't add up. Shipments that didn't match invoices, money that disappeared into shell companies overnight. Emily's arms tightened around herself. What kind of shipments? Victor's jaw worked before the words came out. People, Emily. Not just money. People. The word hit the room like a physical weight. Emily felt her stomach drop straight through the floor. Human trafficking, she whispered. Your father found records, names, dates, routes. He spent almost a year quietly building a case, copying documents, recording conversations. He wasn't doing it for money or glory. He was doing it because he just found out he was going to be a father. And he told me, I remember this like it was yesterday. He told me he didn't want to raise a daughter in a world where men like that got to keep winning. Emily's eyes burned. She hated how much that sentence made her chest ache for a man she'd never even met. So what happened? She asked. If he had proof, why didn't he just go to the police? Because the man running the operation had police in his pocket. Judges, too. Your father figured that out the hard way, brought his evidence to a detective he thought he could trust, and less than a week later, 2 men jumped him outside a bar and beat him half to death as a warning. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. He didn't stop. Victor continued, his voice rougher now. If anything, it made him angrier. He moved the evidence somewhere safe. Told me if anything ever happened to him, I was the only one who knew where it was, and I was the only one he trusted to protect what mattered most. Me, Emily said quietly. You, Victor confirmed. He held you exactly once the night you were born. I was standing right outside the hospital room. He came out with tears running down his face, this 6'2" biker who'd never cried in front of me once in 10 years, and he grabbed my arm and said, if anything happens to me, protect my daughter. Promise me, Victor. And I promised. Emily sat down hard in the chair behind her, her legs finally giving out completely. 3 weeks later, Victor said, he vanished. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was probably only seconds. Vanished how? Emily finally managed. Vanished like taken, vanished like he ran. I need the actual words. Victor, please. Victor pulled the chair across from her and sat down, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like an unstoppable wall of muscle and more like an old man carrying a grief that had never once been allowed to rest. His motorcycle was found abandoned on the side of Route 9, 20 miles outside of town. Engine still warm. Blood on the seat, not enough to say for certain what happened, but enough that nobody who loved him believed for 1 second he just rode off and started a new life somewhere. And the police ruled it inconclusive. No body, no evidence of foul play they could prove, because the same men with judges in their pocket made sure of that. Officially, Daniel Carter is still an open missing persons case. Unofficially, Victor stopped. Unofficially, what? Unofficially, everybody who rode with him assumed he was dead within a week. Emily's whole face crumpled. 23 years of grief. She never even knew she was owed, finally breaking free all at once. She pressed both hands over her mouth, trying to hold in a sob that came out anyway, raw and broken. "He didn't leave me," she said over and over, like she was trying to convince some deep wounded part of herself that had believed the opposite her entire life. "He didn't leave me. He didn't leave me." "No," Victor said quietly, reaching across the space between them, not quite touching her, giving her room to fall apart the way she needed to. "He didn't." For a long moment, Emily just cried. Not delicate tears, but the kind that came from somewhere much older than tonight, somewhere that had been waiting 23 years for permission. Then through the wreckage of it, a thought surfaced sharp and sudden. "Wait!" She wiped her face hard with the back of her hand. "You said inconclusive. No body. That means—" Victor's expression shifted just slightly, and Emily caught it instantly. "That means what, Victor?" "It means we never had proof," Victor admitted, and something about the careful way he said it made Emily's pulse spike again. "For years, that was enough for me to believe he was gone. But 8 years ago, one of our contacts down in Nevada swore he saw a man matching Daniel's description working a garage outside Reno. Same walk, same laugh apparently. Gone before anyone could get close enough to confirm it." Emily's whole body went rigid. "You think he's alive?" "I think," Victor said carefully, "that I've chased down 4 different rumors over 23 years, and every single one of them turned out to be nothing. I stopped telling myself it was hope a long time ago because hope like that will eat a man alive if he lets it. But you never told my mother this. You never told me." "What was I supposed to say?" Victor's voice cracked, just barely the first real crack Emily had seen in him all night. "Hey, there's a small chance your husband's alive, but I can't prove it. And if I'm wrong, I get to watch you grieve him twice. I made a choice to protect you both from that. Maybe it was the wrong one. I don't know anymore." Emily sat with that for a long moment, anger and aching hope tangled together so tightly she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "I need to call my mother," she said, suddenly standing. "She needs to know I'm safe. She needs to know all of this." "Emily, wait." But Emily was already pulling her phone from her apron pocket, and the second the screen lit up, her stomach dropped for an entirely different reason. 14 missed calls, all from her mother. The most recent one, 4 minutes ago. "Something's wrong," Emily whispered, hitting redial with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone picked up, but it wasn't her mother's voice. "Emily Carter," a man's voice said, calm, almost pleasant. The kind of calm that made every hair on Emily's arm stand straight up. "Your mother's right here. She's fine. For now." The phone nearly slipped from Emily's shaking hand. "Who is this? Where's my mom? Let me talk to her." "That depends entirely on you." The man's voice stayed level, almost bored, like he was discussing the weather instead of holding a woman hostage. "You have something that belongs to us. Or rather, your father did 23 years ago, and we have reason to believe he was foolish enough to leave it somewhere you might one day find. Bring it to us, and your mother walks away untouched. Involve the bikers, involve the police, and I promise you, Emily, you will spend the rest of your life understanding exactly what your father's stubbornness cost the people he loved." "I don't have anything. I don't even know what you're talking about." "Then I suggested," the man said softly, "you find out quickly." The line went dead. Emily stood frozen, phone still pressed against her ear, the dial tone buzzing uselessly into the silence of the room. Victor was already on his feet, reading the horror on her face before she even managed to speak. "Emily, what happened?" "They have my mom," she said, voice barely a whisper, and then louder, cracking apart at the edges. "They have my mom, Victor. They have her. And they said if I don't bring them something my father hid, they're going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Victor was already moving toward the door, shouting something to the main room in a voice Emily had never heard from him before, sharp, commanding, absolutely without mercy. "Bear Marcus. Everyone up now. We've got a hostage situation and it just became personal." The room outside erupted into motion, boots hitting the floor. Voices overlapping, someone grabbing a set of keys off a hook by the door. Rosa appeared in the doorway of the small room, rifle already off her shoulder, and in her hands her earlier calm entirely gone. "Victor, talk to me. What do we know?" "They've got Laura Carter, Emily's mother. Whoever's running this operation just went straight for the throat." Victor's hands were shaking now, too, Emily noticed, not from fear but from a fury so old and so deep It had clearly been waiting 23 years for a target to finally land on. Victor, Emily grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. They said if I bring them whatever my father hid, they'll let her go. What did he hide? Where is it? I don't know, Victor admitted, and the honesty in his voice was somehow worse than a lie would have been. He never told me where. He said the fewer people who knew, the safer it would be. I only know it exists. I don't know what it is, and I don't know where. Then how are we supposed to save her? Emily's voice broke into something close to a scream. Months, no years of buried grief, and now sudden, sharp terror pouring out all at once. You promised him you'd protect me. You promised. What good is that promise if my mother dies because of a secret none of us can even find? Victor's face went pale, the accusation landing exactly where it was aimed. For a moment, he looked less like the unshakable president of a motorcycle club and more like a man watching a second promise slip through his fingers in real time. I am not going to let that happen, he said, low and fierce. Not to her, not to you, not again. Again. Emily caught the word instantly. What do you mean again? Victor's eyes flickered just for a second toward Rosa, some silent exchange passing between them that Emily couldn't read. There's something else you need to know, Victor said slowly. Something I should have told you the moment I sat down across from you tonight. Emily's stomach turned to ice. What? The night your father disappeared, Victor said. I was supposed to be with him. We were meeting to move the evidence somewhere safer. I was 15 minutes late. Victor. 15 minutes, he repeated, and the guilt in his voice was old and worn smooth like a stone carried in a pocket for 2 decades. By the time I got there, all I found was his bike on the shoulder of the road and blood on the seat. If I hadn't stopped for gas. If I'd left 5 minutes earlier. You don't know that it would have changed anything, Emily said. But even as the words left her mouth, she understood with sudden and painful clarity exactly what she was looking at. A man who had spent 23 years trying to atone for 15 minutes he could never get back. Maybe not, Victor said, but I have spent every day since telling myself that the least I could do was make sure I was never late again. And right now, Emily, your mother is somewhere out there because I let this get out of control tonight. And I am not going to lose another person I promised to protect. The room around them had gone quiet, every rider now armored up, engines already turning over, outside waiting. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his earlier hostility toward Emily entirely gone, replaced by grim readiness. Victor, Duke traced the call. It bounces through a relay, but he thinks he's got a location. An old grain facility off Route 12, 20 minutes out. That's Voss land, Victor said, and something dark passed behind his eyes at the name. Voss, Emily repeated. Who's Voss? Richard Voss. Victor's voice had gone flat, controlled in the way of a man forcing himself not to feel the rage clawing up his throat. The businessman your father was building his case against. I should have known he'd be the one behind tonight. He's been waiting 23 years for the right moment to make sure nothing your father found ever sees daylight. He's still around. After everything. Emily's hands curled into fists. He got away with it for 23 years. Every year he gets more powerful, and every year it gets harder to touch him, Victor said. But your mother is inside one of his buildings right now, and that is the one mistake that man is about to regret for the rest of his life. Emily grabbed Victor's arm again, this time not in accusation but in desperation. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Victor's answer was instant. It's too dangerous. She's my mother. Emily's voice cracked apart entirely, now raw and furious and terrified all at once. You don't get to decide this for me, Victor. Not tonight, not after everything you just told me. I lost a father I never even got to meet because of these people. I am not losing my mother too, while I sit safely in some back room waiting for news. Victor stared at her, and something in his face, some flicker of recognition, made Emily wonder just for a second if he was seeing her father in that exact moment, the same stubborn refusal to stand aside while people he loved were in danger. You stay in the truck, Victor finally said, voice tight. You do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, or so help me, I will personally carry you back here myself. Are we clear? Crystal, Emily said, already moving toward the door. Rosa fell into step beside her, pressing something small and cold into Emily's hand, a folded pocket knife worn smooth with age. Your father's, Rosa said simply. He left it here once years ago and never came back for it. Feels right that you should have it now. Emily's fingers closed around it so tightly, the edges bit into her palm, a strange comfort blooming in her chest, even as terror clawed at every other part of her. Outside, the compound had transformed into something out of a war movie, engines roaring to life one after another, riders checking weapons with the kind of practiced calm that came from having done this before, headlights cutting through the dark like a small army assembling in the dead of night. Victor swung onto his bike, and Emily climbed into the cab of an old pickup truck beside Marcus, who'd been assigned reluctantly to drive her. "You really his daughter," Marcus said, glancing at her sideways as he started the engine. "Same stubborn look in your eyes he used to get right before he did something insane. Is that a compliment or a warning?" "With Daniel Carter," Marcus said, pulling out behind the line of motorcycles, "it was always both." The convoy tore down the dark highway, 12 motorcycles and one battered pickup truck, racing toward a grain facility where a woman who had spent 23 years protecting her daughter from a truth too dangerous to speak was now trapped, waiting at the mercy of the very man who had destroyed her family in the first place. Emily pressed her palm flat against the truck window, watching the taillights of Victor's motorcycle cut through the darkness ahead of her, and made herself a silent promise of her own, one just as fierce, just as unbreakable as the one Victor had made to her father 23 years ago. Whatever happened tonight, whatever Richard Voss thought he could take from her family, he was about to learn that the Carter women didn't break. They only got harder to stop. Ahead through the darkness, the outline of a massive structure rose against the horizon. Dark, silent windows, like empty eyes watching the convoy approach. And somewhere inside it, Laura Carter sat with her wrists bound to a metal chair, praying that her daughter had listened to every warning she'd ever given her about strangers, knowing with a mother's certainty that she almost certainly hadn't. Headlights killed the convoy, folding into the dark like it had done this 100 times before. Marcus threw the truck into park and turned to Emily with a look that dared her to argue. "You heard Victor. You stay right here." "I heard him," Emily said, which wasn't the same as agreeing, and Marcus seemed to understand that better than she expected, because he didn't relax. Ahead through the windshield, the grain facility rose out of the dark like something abandoned by time silos catching moonlight, a low office building attached at one end, a single light burning behind a second-floor window. Emily's whole body locked onto that window the second she saw it. "That's her," she whispered. "That's where she is." "You don't know that." "I know it." Emily's voice cracked certainty and terror tangled together. A mother's light doesn't just happen to be the only one burning in a building full of men who kidnapped her. Victor's bike had already peeled off toward the tree line, 3 riders falling in behind him, moving low and fast across open ground. Bear and 2 others swung wide toward the far side of the facility, and within seconds the parking lot outside the truck was empty of everyone but Marcus, Emily, and the sound of her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. "How long do we wait?" Emily asked. "As long as it takes." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Emily's hand closed around the pocket knife in her lap. Her father's knife, the one Rosa had pressed into her palm like a blessing, and she ran her thumb over the worn handle over and over like it might tell her what to do. Somewhere out past the tree line, a dog started barking sharp and sudden, and every instinct in Emily's body screamed that something had already gone wrong. "Marcus," her voice was barely a whisper. "That dog, I hear it." A radio clipped to Marcus's vest crackled to life, Victor's voice low and urgent underneath a wash of static. "We've got 2 guards on the east door, more than we counted. Bear, you seeing this?" "Seeing it," Bear's voice crackled back. "We can still get around. Do it quiet." Emily's fingers tightened around the knife. Every second felt like an hour. Every silence like it was about to break into something violent, and she found herself praying. Actually praying for the first time in years to a father she'd only known for a handful of hours. Please, please let her be okay. The radio crackled again, and this time Victor's voice had changed, gone flat and sharp, in a way that made Emily's stomach drop straight through the floor of the truck. "Contact. We've got contact east side." Gunfire cracked through the night, distant but unmistakable, 3 shots, and then a pause, and then 2 more, and Emily's whole body went rigid with a terror so complete it felt like drowning. "That's them," she gasped. "Marcus, that's them. We stay put." Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his own fear barely held in check. "That's the job. We stay put and we trust them to do theirs. But Emily was already reaching for the door handle, some primal certainty overriding every ounce of caution she had left. Emily, my mother is in that building, she said, and her voice didn't shake anymore. It had gone somewhere past fear into something colder and more determined. I am not going to sit in a truck while she's up there alone. Victor will kill me. Then don't tell him. Before Marcus could grab her, Emily was out of the truck and running low across the open ground, the cold night air tearing at her lungs, the gunfire growing louder with every step, her heart slamming so hard against her ribs it hurt to breathe. She didn't think about what she was running toward. She thought about a lit window on the second floor and a mother who had lied to protect her for 23 years, and a promise that had been made before Emily was even born, a promise that Emily, in this exact moment, decided she was going to help keep whether Victor liked it or not. She reached the side of the building just as two more shots rang out closer now and pressed herself flat against cold metal siding, chest-heaving blood roaring in her ears. A door hung open a few feet away, half shattered off its hinges. Light spilled out from inside along with voices, two men arguing, one of them clearly panicked. Wasn't supposed to be like this. Voss said clean, he said quiet. Nothing about tonight has been clean since that woman's daughter walked into a diner with a Hell's Angel. Emily's breath caught at the sound of her own name. She edged closer to the doorway, every nerve screaming at her to run the other way, and looked inside. Two guards stood in a narrow hallway, backs to her, weapons raised toward the sound of movement deeper in the building. Neither of them had noticed the girl in a waitress uniform frozen in the doorway behind them. Emily's hand tightened around the knife in her pocket, and for one terrible, dizzying second, she genuinely considered using it. Then a third voice cut through the hallway, calm, unhurried, chilling, and exactly how unbothered it sounded against the chaos of gunfire outside. Gentlemen, I believe we have a guest. Emily's blood turned to ice. Both guards spun toward the doorway, weapons rising, and she barely had time to raise her hands before a fourth figure stepped into the hall behind them. An older man, silver hair, dressed like he'd walked out of a business dinner instead of a hostage situation. His expression carrying the mild, almost pleasant curiosity of a man examining something interesting rather than threatening. Emily Carter, Richard Voss said, and the sound of her full name in his mouth made her skin crawl. I was beginning to think Victor Hayes had finally developed some sense. I should have known better. Sentiment always wins with that man. It's rather his defining flaw. Where's my mother? Emily's voice came out steadier than she felt, and some distant part of her was proud of that. Upstairs, comfortable, unharmed so far. Voss tilted his head, studying her with the detached interest of a collector examining a new specimen. You have his eyes, you know. Daniel's. I noticed it the moment those photographs came across my desk years ago, tracking your mother's little relocation. I always wondered if I'd ever see them in person. You've been watching us. The realization landed like a blow. For years, you knew where we were the entire time. Knowing and acting are very different luxuries, Voss said. As long as your mother stayed quiet and you stayed ordinary, there was no reason to disturb either of you. Unfortunately, ordinary appears to have ended tonight. Because of Victor. Because of your father, Voss corrected, something harder flickering behind his eyes for the first time. 23 years, and I still don't have what he took from me. Do you have any idea how expensive that kind of loose end becomes over 2 decades? How many sleepless nights one stubborn biker with a notebook can cause a man in my position? Emily's mind raced, fear and fury colliding into something sharper than either alone. If you don't have it, then you don't know if it even still exists. Maybe it's gone. Maybe he destroyed it before I had him killed. Voss finished almost gently, and the casual horror of the sentence stole the air from Emily's lungs. No, Miss Carter. Daniel Carter was many things, but careless was never one of them. That evidence exists. And now that his daughter has surfaced, guided so conveniently by his old friend, I suspect it's only a matter of time before it surfaces too. Footsteps thundered somewhere above them, followed by a muffled shout that was unmistakably Victor's voice, and Voss's calm expression flickered just slightly toward genuine irritation. It appears your rescue party has found the stairwell faster than anticipated, he said. How disappointing. I so rarely get to enjoy a proper conversation these days. Let my mother go, Emily said. No. Let her go and I'll help you find whatever you want. I swear it. Emily, don't. The voice came from above, sharp with panic, unmistakably her mother's cut short, by the sound of a hand or a silencing button. Mom! Emily lunged toward the stairs, and one of the guards grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, wrenching her back. Voss watched the whole exchange with something almost like amusement. You're every bit as stubborn as he was, he mused. It really is remarkable. Genetics are so rarely that generous. The sound of a door being kicked off its hinges somewhere above them cracked through the building like a gunshot, followed immediately by Victor's voice roaring with a fury Emily had never heard from him. Voss! For the first time all night, real fear flickered across Richard Voss's composed face. It seems our conversation is over, he said smoothly, already backing toward a side door, snapping his fingers at the two guards. Bring the girl. We'll finish this discussion somewhere less crowded. No. Emily fought against the guard's grip, twisting hard, and in the chaos of the moment, her fingers found the pocket knife in her pocket and flicked it open with a motion that felt like instinct rather than choice. She drove it hard into the guard's forearm, and his shout of pain was loud enough to shake the walls. His grip loosened just enough. Emily tore free and bolted for the stairs. Emily, Victor's voice closer now, raw with terror and relief in the same breath. He appeared at the top of the stairwell, blood on his knuckles, eyes wild with the particular fear of a man who'd promised to protect someone and nearly failed. Get down now. Gunfire erupted behind her bear, and two other riders bursting through the side entrance, engaging the remaining guards in the hallway, chaos exploding in every direction at once. Emily dropped to the floor on instinct, covering her head, the world narrowing down to noise and heat and the desperate hammering of her own pulse. When it stopped seconds or minutes later, she couldn't tell which the silence felt almost louder than the gunfire had. Emily? Victor was beside her now, hauling her up, checking her over with frantic hands. Are you hit? Are you hurt? I'm fine, she gasped. Mom Voss has her. He was taking her out a side door. Victor's face went white, and he was moving before she even finished the sentence, taking the stairs two at a time. Emily right behind him, despite every instruction he'd ever given her. They burst into a second-floor office just in time to see a car peeling away from a side exit through a shattered window, taillights disappearing into the dark, and standing in the middle of the room, wrists still bound but very much alive, was Laura Carter, free, terrified, and staring at her daughter like she was seeing a ghost. Emily! Laura's voice broke completely. Oh my God, Emily, you're supposed to be safe. You're supposed to be at work. Mom! Emily crossed the room in 3 steps and threw her arms around her mother so hard they both nearly went down sobbing into her shoulder. 23 years of unanswered questions colliding with the pure animal relief of finding someone alive. I'm okay, Laura kept saying over and over, running her hands over Emily's face like she needed to physically confirm it. I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. Victor cut the last of the zip ties from Laura's wrists with a knife of his own, his hands trembling with an emotion he clearly wasn't used to showing in front of anyone. Laura, he said quietly. Laura Carter looked up at him, and something passed between the two of them, old, complicated, full of history Emily hadn't been let in on yet. Victor, Laura's voice went cold in a way that startled Emily. 23 years, and you couldn't just leave her alone. She was already found, Laura. This wasn't my choice. It's always your choice. Laura's fear cracked suddenly into fury, 23 years of buried terror pouring out in one furious breath. I moved us 3 times before she turned 5. I changed our name once. I lied to my own daughter every single day of her life to keep her out of exactly this, and one visit from you one night, and it's all undone. Mom! Emily pulled back, staring at her mother in disbelief. You knew he was out there. You knew Victor existed this whole time. Laura's face crumpled, guilt and grief and exhaustion all fighting for space at once. I knew, she admitted quietly. I've always known. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emily's feet. You told me my father abandoned us. You told me that my whole life. I told you what I needed you to believe to keep you safe. Laura said, tears streaming freely now. Do you understand what it's like, Emily, to raise a child alone knowing that the truth could get her killed? I made a deal a long time ago. I told myself it was to protect you. What deal? Victor's voice had gone very quiet, very still in a way that was somehow more frightening than his earlier fury. Laura, what deal? Laura wouldn't meet his eyes. Voss found me 8 years ago. He said if I stayed quiet, if I never went looking for answers, never let Emily near the club, near you, near any of it, He'd leave us alone. I took the deal, Victor. I took it because I was terrified and because for 8 years it worked. The revelation landed on Emily like a physical blow, a second layer of lies peeling back beneath the first, and she took a step back from both of them, overwhelmed. You made a deal with the man who killed my father, she said slowly, to keep me away from the people who actually loved him. I made a deal to keep you alive. Laura's voice cracked into something desperate. You don't understand what it's like to bury one love and then spend every day terrified of burying your child too. So instead, you buried the truth. Emily shot back years of unexplained silences and half answers, finally making a horrible kind of sense. You let me believe I wasn't worth staying for. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it's still doing to me? Laura's face collapsed entirely, and for a moment, standing in the wreckage of a building that still smelled like gunpowder, mother and daughter simply stared at each other across a chasm of 23 years of silence, neither one certain how to cross it. It was Victor who finally broke it, his voice low and steady, cutting through the tension like a hand extended into deep water. We don't have time for this right now, he said. Voss is gone, and he's not going to stop just because tonight went sideways. We need to move all three of us before whoever he calls next arrives. Laura wiped her face hard, some of the old steel returning to her expression. He said something before you all broke in, about the evidence, about Daniel. What did he say? Victor asked, immediately sharp. He said he knew where to look now, Laura whispered. He said Daniel always did love that old garage more than he loved anything else, and that if the evidence wasn't destroyed, it was still sitting right where he left it. Victor went very still. The garage, he repeated. He still owns it. Nobody ever cleared it out, Laura said. I couldn't bring myself to go near it, not once in 23 years. Emily looked between them, something cold and electric settling in her chest. If Voss knows where to look, then we're already behind. Then we move tonight, Victor said, already heading for the door, pulling both women with him by instinct more than force. Before he gets there first. Outside, the compound had gone eerily quiet. The last of the gunfire faded into the kind of silence that follows violence, heavy ringing, unnatural. Bear and Marcus were already loading 2 wounded riders into the truck bed, faces grim, and the moment Victor emerged with Laura and Emily between them, a ragged cheer went up from the remaining men, exhausted relief cutting briefly through the tension. But Victor didn't slow down to celebrate. He was already scanning the tree line that rode the dark horizon beyond the facility, his instincts clearly telling him the night was far from over. Everybody load up, he shouted. We're not staying here another minute. Emily helped her mother into the truck, hands still shaking, mind still reeling from everything that had unraveled in the space of a single night, a father who might still be alive, a mother who had traded silence for survival, a dangerous old man now racing them toward a locked garage that held the truth Daniel Carter had died protecting. As the convoy pulled back onto the dark highway, engines roaring in unison, Emily pressed her forehead against the cool truck window and closed her eyes. Exhaustion and grief and something dangerously close to hope all tangled together inside her chest. Emily. Her mother's voice quiet, broken beside her. I am so sorry for all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. Emily didn't answer right away. She thought about a photograph pressed into her hand at a diner counter, about a promise made outside a hospital room 23 years ago, about a man who might be alive somewhere out there waiting the same way she hadn't known she'd been waiting her whole life. I don't want an apology, she finally said. I want the truth, all of it. No more deals, no more silence. Laura reached over and took her daughter's hand, gripping it tight, and for the first time in years didn't let go. Then let's go find it, she whispered. Together this time. Ahead through the windshield, the dark ribbon of highway stretched on, carrying them all toward an old forgotten garage where a dead man's last secret waited, and toward a truth that Richard Voss, wherever he'd fled to, was racing just as desperately to bury before Emily Carter could finally bring it into the light. Orchestrated narrative arc, void garage ambush, emotional revelations, corruption twist, the cliffhanger. The garage sat at the end of a gravel road so overgrown that Marcus had to stop the truck twice to clear branches from the path, and by the time the convoy rolled to a stop in front of it, Emily's chest had gone so tight she could barely breathe. It looked smaller than she'd imagined. A squat metal building, rust bleeding down its sides, a faded sign over the door that still read, Carter's custom cycles in paint so chipped it was barely legible anymore. 23 years of dust and weather had turned her father's life's work into something that looked abandoned by the world. He built this place with his own hands, Victor said quietly, killing the bike's engine beside the truck. Took him 2 summers. I helped him pour the concrete floor. Laura hadn't said a word since they left the facility. Now staring at the garage through the windshield, her hands trembled in her lap. I haven't been here in 23 years, she whispered. I couldn't. Every time I thought about coming back, You don't have to explain, Emily said, surprising herself with how gently the words came out. Anger and grief were still tangled together in her chest, but underneath all of it, watching her mother's hands shake, something softer was starting to surface too. Victor held up a fist, and every engine behind them cut out at once, the silence that followed, so complete Emily could hear her own pulse in her ears. Something's wrong, he murmured. What? Emily's whole body went rigid. The door. Victor nodded toward the garage entrance. It's already open. Emily's stomach dropped. The rusted metal door, which should have been locked and rusted shut after 2 decades of neglect, hung ajar, a sliver of darkness visible where it should have been sealed tight. They beat us here, Marcus said grimly, already reaching for the rifle propped beside his seat. Everybody out quiet, Victor ordered. Laura, Emily, you stay behind the truck. I mean it this time. Victor, Emily started. I am not negotiating this one, Emily. Not after tonight. His voice left no room for argument, and something in his eyes, raw pleading, made her nod despite every instinct telling her to follow. The riders fanned out around the garage and practiced silence, weapons ready, and Victor led them toward the open door with the kind of careful, deliberate steps of a man who had done this before and hated every second of it. Emily crouched behind the truck bed beside her mother, hard-hammering fingers wrapped so tightly around the door handle that her knuckles ached. If something happens to him in there, Laura whispered more to herself than to Emily, I don't know how I'd... You still love him, Emily said. It wasn't a question. Laura's silence was answer enough. Inside the garage, a flashlight beam swept across old motorcycle frames draped in dust-caked tarps, tool chests rusted shut, the ghost of a life interrupted mid-sentence. Victor moved through it like he was walking through a memory, every shadow familiar and unbearable at once. Clear, Bear's voice called from the back corner. Nobody here. Then who left the door open? Victor murmured, and the question hung in the air like a held breath. He crossed to the back wall to a workbench buried under decades of dust and pulled aside a heavy tarp that had clearly been disturbed recently. Fresh scuff marks in the dust handprints, where there should have been none. Underneath it, a floor-safe door, hanging open empty. No, Victor breathed. No, no, no. Victor, Emily's voice from the doorway, now unable to stay back any longer. What is it? They already got here. Victor's fist slammed against the workbench so hard tools clattered to the floor. Voss's men, they found it before we did. It's gone, Emily. Whatever your father hid, it's already... Wait. Bear's voice cut through the room, tight with sudden urgency. Victor, look at this. He was crouched beside the empty safe, shining his flashlight into the back corner of it, where a small mechanism was clearly visible, wires running from a false panel. That's not how your father built his safes, Victor said, slowly, understanding dawning across his face. No, Bear agreed. That's a decoy. Somebody planted a fake to slow down anyone who came looking. Question is whether it was Daniel who set the trap or somebody else. Emily stepped further into the garage, despite herself drawn by something she couldn't name. Her eyes sweeping across the space her father had built with his own hands. A place that had been waiting silent for 23 years for someone to finally come home. He wouldn't have hidden it somewhere obvious, she said slowly. Not if he really thought someone might come looking. She's right, Laura said from the doorway, finally finding her voice. Her eyes had gone distant, caught somewhere in the past. Daniel was obsessive about that. Even before all of this, he never kept anything valuable where it looked valuable. You know something, Victor said, turning to her sharply. Laura, what do you know? Laura's jaw tightened, old guilt flickering across her face. There's a bike, in the back corner under the blue tarp. He never finished it, said he was saving it for something special. He used to disappear out here for hours working on it even after we had Emily on the way. I always assumed it was just a hobby. Victor was already moving, tearing the blue tarp free from a motorcycle frame that had clearly sat untouched for over 2 decades, its chrome dulled, its tank layered in dust. "This bike," Victor said, running his hand along the frame with something close to reverence. "He was building this the last time I saw him." "Check the tank," Laura said suddenly. "He used to hide his cash in the gas tank when we were broke before the club. Said nobody ever thinks to check a full tank." Victor unscrewed the fuel cap with hands that had gone unsteady, reached inside, and his fingers closed around something that clearly wasn't gasoline. He pulled out a sealed plastic bag, and inside it, protected from 23 years of decay, a small waterproof case. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what he hid." Victor set it carefully on the workbench, and after a long moment of hesitation, broke the seal. Inside, a stack of photographs, a small notebook filled with cramped handwriting, a microcassette tape, and tucked at the very bottom an envelope with a single word written across the front in handwriting Emily had never seen before and somehow instantly recognized as belonging to her. Emily. The room went completely silent. Every rider, every set of eyes turned toward her. "That's for you," Victor said quietly. He knew. Even then, he knew you might be the one to find it. Emily's hand shook so badly she almost couldn't pick up the envelope. She sat down hard on an overturned crate, and with her mother kneeling beside her, and Victor standing guard like she was the most important thing in the world, she broke the seal. The handwriting inside was rushed but careful, the words of a man clearly aware he might be running out of time. "My Emily, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't there to give it to you myself, and I need you to know that wherever I am, whatever happened, I did not choose to leave you. I want you to hear that from me in my own words, not from anyone else's version of the story. I found something ugly, something that powerful men want buried, and buried men don't get to raise their daughters. I've made peace with what that might cost me, but I have never, not for one single day, made peace with what it costs you. Everything you need is in this box. Names, dates, proof. Victor knows how to find the right people to give it to people who can't be bought, if any still exist by the time you read this. I need you to be braver than I ever was and finish what I started. I loved your mother more than my own life. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anything, and I only got to hold you once. That is the only regret I carry into whatever comes next. Be careful, be smart, and know that no matter how this ends, you were worth every risk I ever took. Your father, Daniel." Emily's sobs broke the silence of the garage raw and unrestrained, and this time she didn't try to hold them back. Laura wrapped both arms around her, crying just as hard. 23 years of grief finally allowed to exist in the open air. Victor turned away, jaw clenched, blinking hard against his own tears, giving them a privacy the moment demanded, even as every rider in the garage stood witness to it. It was Marcus of all people who finally broke the silence, his earlier hostility toward Emily entirely gone, replaced by something like respect. "We should get moving," he said gently. "Whoever left that decoy could still be close. This isn't the place to go through everything." Victor nodded, wiping his face hard with the back of his hand. "He's right. We need somewhere secure." Emily carefully folded her father's letter and pressed it against her chest like it was something alive. "Wait," she said suddenly. "The tape. What's on the tape?" Victor picked up the small cassette, turning it over in his hands. "Your father kept a recorder in his jacket toward the end. Said if anything ever happened, he wanted his own voice on record, not just paper anyone could claim was forged." "I want to hear it," Emily said immediately. "Emily, it might not be." "I want to hear my father's voice, Victor. I have never once heard it. Not one single time in 23 years. Her voice cracked, fierce and pleading all at once. "Please." Victor looked at Laura, some silent question passing between them, and Laura, tears still streaming down her face, nodded. "She deserves that much," Laura said. "We all do." Rosa produced an old cassette player from a bag slung over her shoulder, the kind of small, practical foresight that made Emily suspect the woman had been prepared for exactly this scenario more than once in her life. Victor loaded the tape with hands that trembled and pressed play. Static first, then cutting through 23 years of silence, a voice warm, tired, achingly familiar, even though Emily had never heard it before, carrying an unmistakable resemblance to something in her own voice she'd never been able to place. "This is Daniel Carter. If you're hearing this, something's happened to me, and I need whoever finds this to understand exactly what you're dealing with. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Richard Voss has been running people through this state for 6 years using Meridian Trucking as a front. I have shipment manifest, bank transfers, and names including a detective on Voss's payroll named Aldous Finch, and a county judge whose name I won't say out loud on this tape in case it ever falls into the wrong hands before the right ones get it. Victor's face went sharp and pale at the mention of the detective's name. My daughter is due any day now. The recording continued, Daniel's voice cracking with an emotion that reached across 2 decades and then landed directly in Emily's chest. I don't know what kind of world she's going to grow up in, but I know I'm not going to be the kind of father who looked away. Victor, if you're the one who finds this, you know what to do. Protect them both. That's all I need from you. That's all I've ever needed. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed felt like the entire garage was holding its breath. Finch, Victor said, finally his voice low and dangerous. Aldous Finch is still the detective your father named. Still, Emily's head snapped up. He's still on the force. He's not just still on the force, Marcus said grimly, pulling out his phone and scrolling with the quick, angry fingers before turning the screen toward the group. He's the police chief now. The revelation hit the garage like a physical blow. Emily stared at the photo on Marcus's screen, a silver-haired man in a crisp uniform, smiling for an official department photo, the same man who had beaten her father half to death and then spent 23 years climbing the very institution that was supposed to protect people from men exactly like him. That's why nothing my father found ever went anywhere, Emily said slowly, horror dawning across her face. It's not just that Voss had police in his pocket. The police are Voss. Which means going to local authorities with this evidence isn't just risky, Victor said grimly. It's suicide. Then who do we take it to, Laura demanded. Emily can't sit on evidence like this forever, not with Voss already hunting her. But if the police chief himself is compromised, State Attorney General's office, Rosa cut in, federal if we can manage it, somebody outside Finch's reach. That takes time we might not have, Victor said. Voss knows we have it now. That decoy safe wasn't random. Somebody wanted whoever came looking to think they'd already lost. Which means Voss is expecting us to either give up or make a mistake trying to move fast. Emily's phone buzzed suddenly in her apron pocket, sharp and unexpected in the tense silence of the garage, and every single person in the room went still. Unknown number. Emily's hands shook as she answered, putting it on a speaker with trembling fingers. Hello, Emily. Richard Voss's voice, unmistakable calm as ever, though something underneath it now carried the faintest edge of urgency he hadn't shown before. I understand congratulations are in order. You found your father's little time capsule. Emily's blood ran cold. I do. How do you? I have people everywhere, Ms. Carter. I've had 23 years to make sure of it. A pause, deliberate, calculated. I'll make this simple. Bring me what you found tonight, and I will make absolutely certain nothing happens to your mother, to Victor, or to any of his associates ever again. Refuse, and I promise you this war will not end with me losing. You killed my father, Emily said, and her voice, to her own surprise, didn't shake at all. You've spent 23 years hunting a family that never did anything to you except love him. I am not giving you anything. Voss's silence stretched long enough that Emily wondered if the call had dropped. Brave words, he finally said, from a girl who has no idea what I'm actually capable of. Try me, Emily said and hung up. The garage erupted into motion the second the call ended, Victor barking orders, riders scrambling toward their bikes, Marcus already pulling up a map on his phone, calculating routes. He'll trace that call, Victor said. We need to move now, and we need somewhere he doesn't already know about. There's nowhere he doesn't know about, Laura said, panic creeping back into her voice. He's had 23 years to map every place we've ever touched. Not everywhere, Victor said, and something in his voice made Emily look up sharply. There's one place, somewhere I never told him about because I never told anyone about it. Not even the club. What place? Emily asked. Victor hesitated, and for a moment, something unreadable passed behind his eyes. Grief maybe, or a guilt so old it had calcified into something else entirely. Your father had a cabin, he said finally, north up near the state line. He built it the same summer he built this garage, told me once. It was meant to be a place he could take you and your mother someday. away from all of this if he ever got the chance to walk away clean. Laura's breath caught audibly. I never knew about a cabin. He never got to tell you, Victor said quietly. He was planning to. The week after you were born, actually. He wanted it to be a surprise. Emily felt something in her chest twist painfully at the thought. A life her father had been building, quietly, hopefully, right up until the moment it was taken from him. Then that's where we go, she said. It's a 4-hour drive, Marcus warned, with Voss's people possibly already looking for us. Then we better start moving, Victor said, already sweeping the evidence box back into its bag, tucking Daniel's letter carefully into an inner vest pocket, like something sacred. Everybody bikes up. We move in 5. As the garage exploded into organized chaos around her, Emily found herself standing very still, staring at the half-finished motorcycle her father had never gotten to complete the gas tank that had guarded his last words for 23 years, the ghost of a man who had built 2 things in this space, a business and a promise, and only gotten to keep one of them safe. He would be proud of you, Laura said softly, coming to stand beside her own. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that. I need him to still be alive, Emily said, the words slipping out before she could stop them, raw and unguarded. I know that's insane. I know Victor said there's no proof. But Mom, what if he is? What if somewhere out there he's still... Emily. Laura's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through the fragile hope before it could grow too large to survive breaking. I need you to be careful with that thought. I loved your father more than anything in this world, and I have wondered the exact same thing every single day for 23 years. Hope like that can either save you or destroy you, sometimes both. Victor appeared beside them, having overheard the last of the exchange. His expression carefully neutral in a way that told Emily he was holding something back. There's something else, he said slowly. Something I probably should have told you back at the compound, but there wasn't time, and I honestly wasn't sure it mattered. Emily's pulse spiked. What? The Reno sighting, Victor said. 8 years ago. I told you it was unconfirmed, a rumor that went nowhere. He paused, jaw tightening. What I didn't tell you is that 3 months ago, right before you turned 23, somebody using a name close enough to Daniel's to make my contact do a double take opened a P.O. box 2 counties over. Paid in Kahina. Never came back for the mail. The garage seemed to tilt beneath Emily's feet. You're telling me this now, she demanded. After everything tonight, you're telling me this now. I didn't want to hand you false hope on the worst night of your life. Victor said, guilt written across every line of his face. I've chased ghosts before, Emily. I didn't want you chasing one too, not until I had something real. And do you now something real? Victor reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper, an address written in handwriting that made Emily's whole body go cold with a hope so sharp it physically hurt. I got the P.O. box address from my contact an hour before I walked into that diner tonight, Victor admitted. I was going to look into it quietly on my own without dragging you or your mother into a hope that might break both your hearts all over again. Then everything happened and there wasn't time. Emily stared at the address in his hand, her father's letter pressed against her heart, the sound of his voice from the cassette tape still echoing in her ears, and felt the entire night, the diner, the chase, the garage, the truth about her mother, the evidence, Voss's threats collapsed into a single desperate, terrifying question. Where is it? She whispered. The P.O. box. Where? Victor's eyes met hers, steady despite everything, and behind him the last of the riders swung onto their bikes' engines, roaring to life against the darkness, ready to move toward a cabin that held a promise her father never got to keep. Same town as the cabin, Victor said quietly. Emily, I think your father might have been closer to home than any of us ever imagined. The 4-hour drive north felt longer than the entire night that came before it, the convoy moving in tight formation through back roads Victor clearly knew by memory, avoiding highways, avoiding anything with cameras or traffic that could report their position back to Voss. Emily sat pressed against her mother in the truck bed's cab, the address in Victor's handwriting folded so many times in her palm that the creases had gone soft. You're not sleeping, Laura observed quietly somewhere around hour 2, watching Emily stare out at the dark tree line rushing past. How could I sleep, Mom? What if it's really him? What if after everything we're driving toward? Don't. Laura's hand tightened over hers, not unkind, just afraid. Please, baby. I can't watch you build something up in your heart only to have it break again tonight. I don't think either of us could survive that twice. Emily wanted to argue, wanted to hold on to the hope blooming dangerously in her chest, but the fear in her mother's voice was too raw to push against. The radio on Marcus's dashboard crackled suddenly, Victor's voice cutting through tight with urgency. We've got a tail. 2 cars been with us since the county line. Emily's whole body went rigid. Voss can't confirm, Victor said, but nobody innocent follows a line of motorcycles down an unmarked back road at 4 in the morning. What do we do? Marcus asked. Split formation at the fork ahead. Bear take 4 bikes east, draw them off if they follow. Rest of us keep north. The convoy fractured at the next intersection, half the riders peeling east in a roar of engines, taillights disappearing into the dark. And for a long, breathless mile, nobody in the truck spoke, watching the mirrors waiting to see which way the pursuing headlights would break. They didn't follow east. They're still with us, Marcus said grimly, watching his side mirror. Victor, they took the bait, but only half of it. Copy? Victor's voice crackled back harder now. They want the truck. They want Emily. Emily's pulse spiked so hard she felt it in her throat. Mom, I've got you, Laura said, reaching across to grip her daughter's hand so tight it hurt, an old, fierce instinct rising up in her voice that Emily had never heard before. Nobody is touching you again tonight. I promise you that. The chase that followed was worse than the one from hours earlier. Tighter roads, sharper turns, headlights swinging wildly across trees as Marcus fought the wheel. Victor's bike weaving in and out of the mirrors, laying down cover as the pursuing car tried again and again to force its way alongside the truck. Hold on, Marcus shouted and cut the wheel hard right onto a logging road barely wide enough for the truck, gravel spraying the pursuing car's headlights, briefly lost behind a wall of trees. For nearly a minute there was nothing but engine noise and Emily's own heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Then silence. No headlights, no engine noise behind them. We lost them. Marcus breathed, easing off the gas just slightly. I think we actually lost them. Emily exhaled a breath she felt like she'd been holding for hours, and beside her, Laura let out a sound that was half sob, half relieved laughter, the particular hysteria of a person who had survived one too many close calls in a single night. By the time the sky began to lighten at the edges, the convoy limped into a small town that barely qualified as one, a gas station, a shuttered diner, a scattering of houses tucked into the tree line, and Victor's bike slowed at the edge of a dirt drive Emily wouldn't have noticed on her own, half swallowed by overgrown brush. This is it, Victor said, killing the engine. This is Daniel's cabin. Emily climbed out of the truck on legs that felt barely capable of holding her exhaustion and adrenaline warring in every muscle, and stared at the small wooden structure ahead of them. Mist still clinging low to the ground in the pale early light. It looked lived in, not abandoned, not frozen in time like the garage had been. There was a neat stack of firewood by the door. Curtains faded but hung with care in the front window. A small garden bed weeded, growing something green despite the season. Somebody's been here, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Recently, somebody's been living here. Victor's hand moved instinctively to the weapon at his hip, every instinct in his body going sharp and alert. Everybody stay behind me. They approached the door slowly, the whole group tense, and Victor raised his fist to knock, but before his knuckles ever touched the wood, the door swung open on its own. A man stood in the doorway, older than the photograph Emily had seen at the diner counter. Hair gone mostly gray, a beard he hadn't had in that picture, a long scar running from his temple down into his collar that hadn't been there either but the eyes. The eyes were exactly the ones Emily saw in the mirror every single morning of her life. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The whole world seemed to narrow down to the space between the doorway and where Emily stood frozen on the path, 23 years of grief and longing colliding all at once with something too enormous to process. Victor, the man said, his voice rough with disuse, staring past all of them, straight at Emily, like he couldn't look anywhere else. You brought her here. Daniel. Victor's voice cracked completely, all his earlier composure shattering in an instant. You're alive. You're actually 23 years, and you're... I know, Daniel said, and his eyes never left his daughter's face. I know how long it's been. Emily's legs gave out beneath her. She didn't fall exactly. Laura caught her, both women sinking to their knees on the path together. sobbing, staring at a man neither of them had dared to fully believe could still exist. Laura, Daniel's voice broke apart entirely at the sight of her, and he took one unsteady step forward before stopping himself, some old restraint holding him in place like an invisible wall. God, Laura, I am so sorry. For all of it. Every single day. You're alive. Laura's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief and fury and love, all tangled into a sound that didn't seem to belong to any single emotion. 23 years, Daniel. 23 years I mourned you. I raised our daughter alone. I lied to her every day of her life. Her voice broke entirely. How could you let us believe you were dead? Because if you'd known I was alive, Daniel said, and the anguish in his voice was old and raw. Voss would have used both of you to find me, and the second he found me, he would have killed all three of us to finish what he started. I ran that night because staying meant burying you both. I have hated myself every single day since for the choice I made, but I would make it again if it meant you lived. Emily finally found her voice rising unsteadily to her feet, staring at the father she'd only known for a handful of hours through a letter and a cassette tape. You've been alive this whole time, she said, and the words came out sharper than she intended, grief and fury and love crashing together in a way that made no sense and every kind of sense at once. You built a whole life without us. You watched us from a distance for 23 years and never once. Never a distance, Daniel interrupted gently. Emily, I have seen you exactly 4 times in your life. Your kindergarten graduation from a parked car across the street, your 16th birthday watching through the diner window the year you started working there, the day you moved into your first apartment, and 3 months ago standing across the street when you walked out of that diner at the end of your shift. So much like your mother, it stopped my heart. Emily's breath caught. 3 months ago. You were there. You could have just walked up to me, said something, anything, and put a target on your back as second Voss's people connected the dots. Daniel's voice cracked. Emily, the only reason you were safe all these years was because I stayed dead. The moment I show my face, everything you've survived tonight becomes permanent. Voss doesn't stop hunting a threat. He only stops hunting a corpse. The weight of that landed on everyone standing in the misty morning air, and for a long moment, nobody spoke the reality of the situation settling over the reunion like a shadow nobody wanted to acknowledge. It was Marcus who broke the silence, his phone buzzing urgently in his hand, his face going pale as he read the screen. Victor, we've got a problem. What now? Victor's voice was rough, still raw from the reunion he clearly hadn't allowed himself to hope for in years. Bear just radioed in. They lost the tail on the East Road, but Voss's people made a call 20 minutes ago that got picked up by one of our contacts monitoring police scanners. Chief Finch is mobilizing units. Real ones. Marked cars, badges, the works. Toward here, Laura asked, panic flooding back into her voice. Toward here, Marcus confirmed grimly. They know about the cabin. Somebody talked or somebody tracked us better than we thought. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. 23 years of hiding, collapsing into the sharp, focused calm of a man who had clearly spent 2 decades preparing for exactly this moment. Then it's time, he said quietly. Time for what? Emily asked. Time to finish what I started 23 years ago. Daniel turned and disappeared back into the cabin, emerging seconds later with a small metal box of his own, worn and battered, clearly guarded as carefully as the one buried in the garage's gas tank. I've spent every year since building on what I found back then. New names, new shipments, new judges, new deals, new bodies Voss and Finch have buried since the night they thought they buried me. I couldn't bring it forward alone. I had no protection, no family to come back to safely, nothing to lose that I hadn't already lost. But now, Victor asked, now I have my daughter standing in front of me, holding the first half of the case I built my whole life around, Daniel said, and a corrupt police chief driving straight toward us instead of waiting for us to come to him. Now, for the first time in 23 years, I have everything I need in one place at one time and enough witnesses that Voss can't simply make it all disappear. Emily felt something shift inside her chest, grief and fury cooling slowly into something harder and more purposeful. You want to use this as the trap, she said slowly. You want them to come to us. I want them to walk directly into the one thing they can't buy their way out of, Daniel said. A living witness, 23 years of evidence, and a phone call already recording everything that happens next. He held up his own phone screen, lit a call already connected and silent on the other end. "Who's on the other line?" Victor asked. "Sarah Whitfield," Daniel said. "Assistant U.S. Attorney, District Office. I've been feeding her information anonymously for 3 years, through channels Voss's people never managed to trace. She's been building a federal case against Voss and Finch this entire time, waiting for exactly the kind of break that could make it airtight." "You're saying feds are already involved?" Marcus asked, stunned. "I'm saying," Daniel said, "that everything happening in the next 10 minutes is about to be recorded, time-stamped, and handed directly to people Voss and Finch have never managed to corrupt." The sound of engines rose in the distance, multiple vehicles moving fast, closing in on the small dirt road leading to the cabin. "They're here!" Bear's voice crackled over the radio, tension audible even through static. 3 marked units, plus 1 unmarked black SUV bringing up the rear. "That's Voss's car." Emily's stomach dropped straight through the ground. "He's coming himself. He's coming to finish this personally," Daniel said grimly, "because for the first time in 23 years he doesn't have a choice. Everybody listen to me carefully. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, nobody reaches for a weapon unless a weapon is already drawn against them. I need this on record as self-defense, not aggression. Do you understand?" The riders exchanged tense glances, weapons lowered but ready, and one by one nodded. "Emily, Laura," Daniel turned to them, his voice softening even as the tension around them sharpened. "Stay behind me, please. I have already lost 23 years with both of you. I am not losing another second." Laura moved to his side without hesitation, some old instinct pulling her there despite everything, and Emily found herself standing beside her, closer to her father than she had ever physically been in her entire life, close enough now to see the fine lines of exhaustion and fear etched into a face she'd only just met. The cars rounded the bend into view, gravel spraying, and skidded to a stop in a loose semicircle facing the cabin, 3 marked police cruisers and 1 black SUV, doors opening in near unison. Chief Aldous Finch stepped out, first uniform crisp, despite the early hour, hand resting with deliberate casualness near his holster. Behind him, Richard Voss emerged from the SUV, his earlier composure notably frayed at the edges, his eyes locking immediately onto Daniel Carter, standing very much alive in front of him. "Impossible," Voss breathed, and for the first time all night, genuine shock cracked through his careful mask. "Hello, Richard," Daniel said, his voice steady despite everything. "It's been a while. You're supposed to be dead." Voss's voice had lost all of its earlier calm, raw fury bleeding through. You made sure I'd never come back," Daniel finished for him. "You were almost right. Almost." Finch's hand tightened near his holster, eyes flicking between Daniel and the assembled bikers, calculating odds Emily could see him not liking. "This is a federal missing persons case standing in front of a homicide suspect and known criminal organization members. I have every right to detain every single person here. Do you?" Daniel held up his phone screen, still lit, call, still connected. "Because right now, Chief Finch, everything you say is being recorded and transmitted live to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Every threat, every admission, every name you've ever taken money to protect." Finch's face drained of color. "You're bluffing," he said, though his voice wavered. "Sarah," Daniel said calmly into the phone, "did you get all that?" A woman's voice, clear and professional, crackled through the phone's speaker, loud enough for everyone standing in the clearing to hear. "Every word, Mr. Carter. Federal units are already en route to your location, ETA 11 minutes. I'd strongly advise everyone present to remain exactly where they are." The color drained entirely from Finch's face. Voss's hands curled into fists at his sides, 23 years of careful control finally cracking under the weight of a trap he never saw coming. "You son of a—" Voss started toward Daniel, fury overriding whatever remained of his composure, and Victor moved instantly, stepping between them with the same solid, immovable presence he'd shown Emily at the diner counter hours earlier. "Not another step," Victor said, low and dangerous. "Get out of my way," Voss snarled. "You had 23 years to hurt this family," Victor said. "That ends right now." Finch's hand finally moved toward his holster, panic overriding whatever judgment remained, and for one horrifying second, the entire clearing seemed to freeze on the edge of violence. "Chief Finch?" Daniel's voice cut through the tension, steady and clear. "I would think very carefully about your next move. Everything you do right now is on record. Draw that weapon, and you're not looking at corruption charges anymore. You're looking at the rest of your life. Finch's hand hovered trembling over his holster, and for a long, unbearable moment, nobody in the clearing moved. Then in the distance, sirens. Not one or two, a dozen at least, growing louder by the second, converging on the small dirt road from multiple directions. Finch's face went white as bone. You called in backup. I called in the truth, Daniel said. Something you and Voss have been running from for 23 years. It finally caught up. The first federal vehicles broke through the tree line moments later, more than Emily could count. Agents pouring out with a speed and coordination that made it clear this operation had been prepared for far longer than the last 11 minutes. Finch didn't even attempt to run. He simply stood, shoulders slumping, decades of carefully constructed power collapsing in real time as agents moved in to secure him. Voss, however, made one last desperate lunge toward the tree line, and it was Emily, not Victor, not her father, and not any of the hardened riders around her who moved first, some fierce and unshakable instinct driving her forward, blocking his path with nothing but her own body and 23 years of stolen truth behind her eyes. You don't get to run, she said, voice shaking but unbroken. Not after everything you took from us. Voss froze staring at her, and for just a moment, something like genuine fear flickered across his face, not of the agents closing in behind him, but of the girl standing between him and freedom, refusing to move. Federal agents closed the distance within seconds, and Richard Voss, the man who had haunted Emily's family for 23 years, without her ever knowing his name, was finally brought to the ground in handcuffs, a few feet from where her father stood alive, watching justice arrive, decades too late, but not 1 second too soon. The clearing moments ago, a battlefield of raised voices and hovering violence, dissolved slowly into something else entirely. Federal agents processing scenes, statements being taken, the distant sound of Finch's rights being read somewhere near the cruisers. And in the middle of it all, Emily turned back toward her father, tears streaming freely down her face, and for the first time in her entire life, walked into his arms. Daniel held her, like he was terrified she might disappear if he loosened his grip, even slightly, his own tears falling into her hair. 23 years of longing finally allowed to exist in the open instead of hidden behind a car window or a diner glass. I'm sorry, he kept whispering. I'm so sorry. For all of it, every birthday, every year. You're here now, Emily said, gripping the back of his jacket like she'd never let go. That's what matters. You're actually here. Laura joined them, wrapping her arms around them both, and for one long, unbroken moment, the family that Richard Voss had spent 23 years trying to destroy stood together in the pale morning light, whole for the first time since before Emily was even born. The weeks that followed unfolded faster than Emily ever could have imagined. Richard Voss's trafficking operation collapsed under the weight of 2 decades of evidence, Daniel's original documents, the cassette recording, and 3 years of information he'd fed quietly to federal investigators from the shadows. Chief Aldous Finch resigned in disgrace before formal charges even reached him, though it did nothing to stop the indictment that followed. The judge Daniel had refused to name on his original tape was identified through cross-referenced financial records and quietly removed from the bench within a month. News crews descended on the small Montana town for exactly 11 days before moving on to the next headline. But for Emily, the story never really ended. It simply changed shape. She sat across from her father at a kitchen table for the first time in her life, watching him pour coffee with hands that had finally slowly stopped shaking every time he looked at her. I miss so much, he said quietly, sliding a mug toward her arm. Your first day of school. Every birthday. I don't know how to make up for that. You don't have to make up for it, Emily said. You just have to be here now. I plan to be, Daniel said, and something in his voice, steady, certain, finally free of 23 years of hiding, made Emily believe him completely. Victor stopped by most evenings sitting on the porch with Daniel, long after the sun went down, 2 old friends slowly relearning how to exist in the same world without a wall of secrets and danger standing between them. Emily would watch them sometimes through the window, listening to the low rumble of their laughter, and think about a photograph pressed into her hand at a diner counter that felt now like it belonged to an entirely different lifetime. Laura and Daniel took things slow or cautious in the particular way of 2 people who had lost each other once and understood exactly how much that cost. But Emily caught them, sometimes hands brushing over the kitchen counter, glances lingering a beat too long, old love quietly finding its way back through the wreckage of everything that had tried to keep them apart. Emily herself went back to school that fall, not for hospitality management like she'd once planned, but for criminal justice driven by something that had ignited in her the night she stood in a grain facility and refused to let a dangerous man walk past her. She spoke eventually at two separate hearings held to strengthen protections for families of trafficking whistleblowers, her voice steady in front of rooms full of strangers. In a way, it had never been steady in front of two men in a diner. Victor sat in the back row at both hearings, arms crossed, pride written so plainly across his weathered face that Emily could see it from the podium every single time. One evening months later, Emily found herself back at Miller's Diner, sitting at the same counter where her entire life had cracked open and rebuilt itself in the space of a single terrifying night. Pete still worked the grill. The jukebox still played the same 6 songs. Nothing about the diner itself had changed at all. Everything else had. Victor slid onto the stool beside her, the same stool he'd taken that first night, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. "Feels different in here now," Victor finally said. "Everything feels different now," Emily agreed. "Good different." "Your father asked me something the other night," Victor said. "Asked if I regretted it. 23 years of watching over you both from the shadows, keeping a promise that cost me almost as much as it cost him. What did you tell him?" Victor turned to look at her, something warm and steady in his weathered eyes. "I told him the only thing I regret is not getting here sooner. Everything else, every mile, every year, at every risk I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Watching you become who you are tonight, that was never a burden, Emily. That was the honor of my life." Emily felt her eyes sting, and this time the tears that came weren't born from grief or fear. They were something else entirely, gratitude maybe, or the particular ache of finally, after everything, feeling completely and unshakably safe. "You kept your promise," she said. 23 years, and you never once broke it. "Your father would have done the same for my kids if I'd had any," Victor said simply. "That's what family means in this life. It's not about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart and who stays standing after." Outside the window, the sun was setting over the same quiet Montana highway where a lie had lived undisturbed for 23 years, and where on one ordinary Tuesday night, the truth had finally found its way home. Emily Carter had spent her whole life believing she was the daughter of a man who didn't love her enough to stay. She knew better now. She was the daughter of a man who had loved her enough to disappear to endure to fight in silence for 23 long years, and the daughter too of every person who had chosen again and again not to look away. She had been found. She had been fought for, and she was at long last exactly where she was always meant to be. Home.